Yo, how's it going, folks? Welcome to episode 171 of the Simpa Life Podcast. Hope you've had another wonderful week. It is getting brighter, it's getting warmer. I don't actually know when I'm releasing this. No, it's not a spring yet, but it will be very soon. Lighter evenings, lighter mornings. I don't know about you, but I'm enjoying it. I can see the sun out of my office right now. It's probably what's gleaming on my face. It's a gorgeous day. Hope you're feeling good. I'm not going to bore you with too much. I'll do some news and housekeeping at the end, but I wanted to jump straight into today's guest, who I think you guys are going to get a lot out of, to be fair. They are an independent conscious researcher. They're an author with a background in the history and philosophy of medicine. They do many other things that we're going to touch on, but I'm not going to overpopulate his bio. I'm just going to jump into introducing him. They are Danny Nemu. How are you doing, brother?
I'm all right, Simpa. How's it going?
Yeah, it's pretty good. Like I said, I'm solar powered, I believe, so I'm feeling pretty good right now. Yeah, can't complain. How about yourself?
Yeah, I'm all right. I've got the sun in my face, so my shiny forehead, and ready to go.
Excellent, excellent. Well, yeah, we've both got a veneer of glee and light across our faces. So, yeah, this is going to be good. This is going to be good. For people that don't know, obviously you have quite a few different disciplines and areas that you are interested in and work in. But I suppose overall, the researching of consciousness, sort of how did this develop? How long have you been in the field?
Oh, I think I've been conscious since about my 41st day of conception, or after conception. And then when did I get involved in kind of thinking about it and talking about it? I've kind of always been curious about why people believe one thing and don't believe another. Because I think even before I got to that kind of Discordian chaos magic idea of nothing is true, everything is permitted, it all already kind of made sense to me that there's different ways of looking at stuff. And some things reveal certain perspectives and other things reveal other perspectives. So I was really curious about that. And I guess, I got into psychedelics pretty young, managed to survive most of that, but saw quite a lot of the world through various different filters, let's say. And then when I hit university, I was doing a life sciences degree. So I was interested in why people believe stuff. So I was kind of focusing on neurobiology, zoology and pharmacology and that kind of stuff. And I did a course in philosophy of medicine or rather the philosophy of science. How do we decide that something's true in this kind of paradigm of the scientific world? And it was just so deeply flawed and so sociological. We kind of decide things according to how our tribe thinks, basically. It's quite like moving from one scientific perspective to another. So let's say everyone's talking about the entourage effect in cannabis, for example. So we used to be thinking about THC, and now we're thinking about all of these things together. So to move from kind of that which is from the point to the general, that's a big move, and we don't just see it in cannabis science. We see it in all kinds of other areas of science. And that's something like a religious conversion. You leave behind one thing and you take on another. So, yeah, I was just always very curious about that. And then the Jehovah's Witnesses turned up at my door one day when I was thinking about what to do for my dissertation, and I'd been smoking, and they were just so weird. Like, they had such strange ideas. And one of the things everyone knows about the Jehovah's Witnesses is that they don't do blood transfusions, right? So everyone, always hear about how awful they are to their children, not letting them have blood transfusions. Historically, that has pushed scientists to find different ways of treating Jehovah's Witnesses. So I got really interested in the way of how beliefs affect science, in particular, how they push science in certain directions. And then that broadened out into a general fascination with the apocalyptic cults, of which the Jehovah's Witnesses are one. And from there, I wrote 2 books and I'm halfway through a third book on the apocalypse and the unveiling, which is what apocalypse means from different perspectives. So starting off in what it means in science, how we discover stuff. Discovery is a cognate for unveiling, which is a cognate for apocalypse. you know. So how do we discover stuff in science? That's my first book. My second book is about what's going on inside your brain when you realize something or when you don't notice something. That goes into linguistics, how different languages perceive information, record information differently. Neurobiology, neurodiversity, psychedelic drugs, obviously, something you touched on just before in my little, thankfully, very short bio. About drugs in the Bible, and their connection with prophecy. So I guess fundamentally, I'm really interested in what we see, what we don't see, and how the goo in our heads influences what we see and don't see, and how we can moderate and modulate those filters, whether that's through psychedelics, whether that's through hypnosis. I'm a hypnotist. That's my day job, one of my day jobs. And also looking at traditional perspectives on what reality is and how we interpret stuff. So one of the things, my other day job is I'm a palmist. I read hands, you know. And I'm particularly interested in the scientific side of, or the scientific perspectives on palmistry. So, for example, how different hormones influence the growth of fingers differently, and how different cortisol will affect how your ligaments work. So they'll make your fingers more or less flexible, and how fats are laid down, all that kind of stuff. I'm fascinated by that kind of stuff. And people often look back at the past and say, oh, it looks like these people were trying to do science, but they weren't as clever as us. But they're kind of fumbling towards something in the darkness, which is like this brilliant lens of science that we have. And often it's completely the opposite, actually. Often, like, for example, in my field of palmistry, the way of describing a hand through the stories of Jupiter, the stories of Saturn, the stories of Apollo, and the various different mounts and the various different, ways of looking at the hand through these much more broad terms than what's your pituitary gland doing and what's your endocrine function and stuff like that. Like, I know that stuff. I've studied that stuff. But the language that the ancients had was so sophisticated, so much more sophisticated than stuff we've got, because it wasn't bound by this, double-blind peer review colonial nonsense that the only way you can generate medicine, the only way you can generate knowledge is by showing that if you run this experiment 20 times, it would only produce that thing one time in 20, and that's your probability, that's your statistical significance. And I'm interested in actual significance, or at least other forms of significance. Yeah. So what do we think? Why do we think it? How can we overcome it? I think that's what I'm really interested in.
Interesting. One thing that I'm curious of, to kind of get more of a rounded image, I guess, in my head of you as a person, is what was your situation with spirituality and belief? Were you brought up with any sort of traditional monotheistic faith or anything like that?
Yeah, I was raised in a Reform Jewish family, and today is it's a very difficult time to be Jewish, really. I broke away from that because I was always horrified by Zionism and the other elements of how Judaism has kind of most of its modern forms has capitulated to the state in various ways. So if you look back in Jewish history, you have this community of people who were not bound by they lived inside different states, but they had their own customs, they had their own rules, and they had their own kind of oblique perspective onto things that were going on in society. So a good example would be Freud. Freud looks in and he sees society, sees what's going on, but he sees it from a different angle. Einstein would be another. Marx would be another. You've got these Jewish guys who are, just because of that difference and the fact that they're not really bought into that culture, but they can see it from the outside. That was always, I think, one of the great assets of the Jewish people. Since the founding of the State of Israel, which I have kind of skin in the game of, really, in the sense that my grandfather's great uncle was the equivalent of the chief rabbi of Jerusalem when the Zionists first arrived. They didn't have a chief rabbi then, but he turned down the job of chief rabbi of New York in order to look after his community in Palestine against the Zionists who were arriving. He was horrified by the Zionists. He said they were the biggest threat to the Jewish people since the Cushites. He said that we should excommunicate them. We shouldn't let them eat at our tables. We shouldn't let them marry our daughters. And if we don't deal with this scourge, then we'll come to regret it very seriously, right? So before I really knew that much about it, I was already kind of horrified as a teenager by what was going on there. I've retained a fascination with scripture, particularly Old Testament scripture. I think that book in its original language, or that library, let's say, in its original language, is the linguistic equivalent of the pyramids. It's like this thing, how the hell was that made? Because it's mind-blowingly brilliant in terms of its poetry. And I'm not talking about it being really good as a moral guide. I'm not saying that. I'm saying as an insight into how the mind works, as an insight into a whole load of things. So that I've retained that, and but in terms of my own kind of, let's say, spiritual development, I've been a belligerent atheist. Even when I became a Buddhist, probably around the age of I would have been 19 or 20 when I joined a Buddhist group. I was still kind of on the atheistic side of that. Somebody taught me a magic spell when I was at uni. I had blue hair. He had blue hair. We got talking. He taught me a spell. I laughed in his face because that's a ridiculous way to think about the universe. It worked. It worked again. And then I got into... I got really into... magic and mysticism, still not really knowing what's behind it. I still don't know whether I believe where the spirits are, but I know that they speak, and I know that they influence people, and I know that quite a lot of the ways that people behave, particularly the most depraved ways, can be interpreted a lot better through the lens of understanding that there are spirits that sometimes take people over, and there are ways of defending yourselves from those spirits. And we've had... our whole history is us feeding our ancestors and praying for protection and, marshalling various forces to deal with other forces in the invisible world. And, we've forgotten all about that. Well, not all of us, but let's say Europe and kind of European culture and the cultures that exported after the Enlightenment, the English Scientific Revolution, all of these kind of things that came about in the wake of Descartes and Newton and this rationalist world we live in. So now we've forgotten to feed our spirits, and now they're still feeding, but they just seem to feed. They seem to feed in a less dignified and civilized way, I think. Yeah, so I'm still, I'm fascinated by all kinds of different spiritual perspectives, and I'm also very interested with how the state and spirits and spiritual lineages interact.
Yeah, I think it's on the same spectrum of knowledge, and we just describe different words or different models of understanding to it. I think Gabor Mate's work around sort of genetic trauma, and then the science of blood memory, as it were. There's something that plays out within that. There's historic kind of research around schizophrenia, or what we come to now classify in a post-psychoanalytical world as schizophrenic type disorders. The reverence that were held in sort of all the cultures for and the value of those that could see different, those that could think different, and the monoculture of science that came from, I think, the monotheistic faiths taking hold of things, and the erasure, mainly the Christians and the fucking Crusades, and then the Dark Ages kind of knocking anybody else's pagan tradition, any natural worship, any traditional ancestral worship, and moving it more into this realm. I think that is informed science, is informed knowledge, that it has to pass that thing of past faith, it's a thing above faith, even though it is an act of faith in a lot of ways, is science. That then if you were born into the church, into the congregation, you go to church, you're raised in the people. When then someone comes along with the idea and the structure of God, you're more likely to believe it. In the same way, if you're inculcated into the scientific faith, as it were, then when someone comes across and presents something in the scientific sense, you're more likely sort of to believe it. And it's I think it's the dialectics between everything that is so important that we've lost contact with. I think the way the image in my head was where physics have kind of got to. And so modern science of the pursuit of the knowledge of stuff has got to this area of going, oh, dark matter. And they've gone, so, right, our model works, but it requires there to be more stuff that we don't have that isn't in the model. And we can't tell you what it is, but that thing makes the model work. And I think the same happens with faith, there's the foundation of it within sort of human tradition and societies and cultures, and then it's you push that faith kind of too far, as it were, and it's that detachment from the day to day. So it's fascinating. Your work is then literally you're pursuing intellectually, and I suppose in a career wise, that just you're one of those rare people is that you're able to monetize your interests, as it were, it would seem, through your palmistry, through the hypnosis, etc.
I think my landlord would be happy if I was monetizing it. We're getting there.
I think the system would want us all to do so, but that's like the economizing of human activity. There's who was he? Tom Hartman. I speak of him quite a bit. I've read a couple of his books. He's, I think, a Christian sort of thinker. He came up with an idea in the late 90s, and he was talking about ADHD and ADD and that being adaptive biological things, and think of them as a necessity within human society. And so, like we said before, you would see them as these people that would have these mystical experiences and could see further. And within that, they would sort of work out the knowledge, the truth of the thing. But now we kind of look, someone is different, and we go, well, that different needs locking off, it needs sectioning, it needs pathologizing, it needs medicating, it needs, do you know what I mean? Rather than seeing what it is for what it could be and actually embracing it. And I think that's why you're seeing the Western kind of world grinding to a halt. The only God left is money, but that system is failing the majority. So I can't see kind of where we go from here.
Yeah, I mean, and it also behaves like such an old god as well. The idea that we've got to placate the markets,
the mystical force.
And we've got to sacrifice things so people will have jobs and that kind of thing to keep this whole thing rolling. Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I wrote a 4-part essay on ADHD. And particularly, part of it was about a literature review of Ritalin. Part of it was looking into herbal, let's say, supports, because I don't want to say treatment, because I don't think it's a disorder. I think the whole language of calling it a disorder is frankly offensive. So what I took this morning was Silastris paniculatus, the intellect tree, which is great. I take about 8 of them when I remember and when I can find it. I take a few other things here and there, mugwort, lots of frankincense. It's not just that, but a whole load of different states were considered useful. Or to be looked at, even the village idiot, there's a homeless guy on the street here, and he's such a delightful guy. I don't think he'd be very functional in a lot of situations, because poor guy, his brain doesn't really work very well, but he's always just the smiliest guy on the street, and that just in itself that cheers up my day. And I see him regularly, and I feel good for it. But another example would be, I was doing a reading for someone yesterday, and he had a mark called a Simeon line, right? So I've got that's my headline, that's my heart line. Those two will sometimes go together. Maybe 1 in 30 people or so will have a headline and a heart line that goes together. In Down syndrome, it's really common. something like 70% of Down syndromes will have one of these. You see it a lot in high-performing athletes, like Method Man's got one, the rapper. You see it in CEOs. It's where the head and the heart go together. And however, the mystery of how our brain produces our body, or how our whole system produces our body, and how that is reflected on the hands is probably too complicated to go into at the moment. But I said to this guy, I said, I hope you take this the right way, but you've got a lot of the wonderful qualities of Down syndrome people. And he used to work with Down syndrome, and he adored them. I used to work with autistic people. I had this when I lived in Japan, I had an autistic class, and I had this one student called Mari-chan, and she was amazing. She used to just get lost in the topography of her desk. I could see that she was just fascinated with the mountains and stuff. At this level, I look at my desk and I think, oh, it's a desk, because I've already categorized it in a way. Now, autistic brains don't work like that. That guy I mentioned before, my grandfather's great uncle, the rabbi in Jerusalem, he could look at a wall and tell you how many bricks were in it, and he could look at a tree and tell you how many leaves were in it, right? And he was quite a high functioning autist, maybe a savant, but he was the guy who said, this Zionism is total nonsense and it's going to cause a great deal of trouble, right? And he was a guy, he got kicked out of about 5 different communities in Europe before he ended up in Palestine. He was described as kind of brilliant and fundamentalist and extremely pedantic, right? And that's such a kind of in certain autistic people end up like that. They get hyper focused on something. This guy got hyper focused on the Talmud, got hyper focused on Jewish law, and he could see what almost, other people saw it, but they didn't respond in the same aggressive way that he tried to. He was an old man by then, and he wanted to send out messages to all the rabbis around the world, but it never happened. But that kind of even the irascible side, the difficult side of the neurodivergent community is extremely, I want to say like almost prophetic, certainly, wise. I'm doing a collaboration with a woman called Rima Staines. She's a fabulous artist. So it's a hypnosis, poetry, and an art collaboration. And she got in touch with me originally because she's epileptic, and the world that she sees through whatever filter of her amazingly different brain is absolutely beautiful. I mean, the artwork that she produces is otherworldly, and just spending time with her artwork, it takes you through into another portal, and then what we're doing is basically looking at her work with a hypnotic induction that I've set to poetry being said. So it's about a 15-minute induction. That's a project called Between. But it also takes you through into something of that world, and she's dealing with it. It's quite terrifying for her. And she doesn't have romantic fits. She has had in the past. She's had really difficult ones where she's, woken up, blood everywhere in the back of an ambulance, not knowing where her children are, But those various states, the whole spectrum, I think, of diversity of our minds, they all shed light on something, And we have this, I think, partly because of the work ethic, and this is a Protestant work ethic that we've inherited, that we're meant to be, getting up at a certain time, going to school, going to work, nose to the grindstone, the devil makes work for idle hands, all that kind of stuff. So we don't have too much space for reverie. We don't have too much space for spending all weekend on mushrooms, fiddling with your different, reorganizing your house, which is what I like to do on mushrooms these days.
Cathartic.
And also like alternative ways of viewing the world have just really been lost a lot, but it's coming back,
Yeah, 100%. I think we're in a rediscovery stage, like you say, that there isn't and there cannot be a panopticonic understanding of life. Not one of us can see the 360 degree of existence. You are hampered from the moment of your birth and your awakening inside of yourself, that every experience you have will make you more yourself. You will become further away from the collective of the whole. And there are certain conditions, and I think that's a wonderful way of describing it. I describe the Freudian descriptors of the id, the ego, and the superego as the heart, the head, and the hara, the three states of intelligence. And so the hara is your base of just irrational but powerful thinking. It's the thing that tells you to stop when you're about to step in the road and a bus goes past. It's like it's got foresight, it's got an awareness and a power. Your heart is then obviously your emotional center, and then the brain is then the cognition. And I think you can train these states in society, and the ideal in what is the best state of consciousness is an alignment of these things. And I think in some people they have that, or I think in all people as a spectrum, we have a gyroscope, and it's about how balanced you are to it. And obviously trauma and things like that can knock you off kilter. Different experiences, a lack of, again, something that Gabor Mate speaks of massively fundamentally, is like a lack of experience. So it's not just trauma that happens to you, it's a loss of things that don't happen to you. Like the biggest issue I suffer as an adult now, as somebody with ADHD and autism, is the lack of training effectively I should have got through mainstream education because of the situations that I was placed into, and then the trauma that created, and the masking and everything else that then becomes fundamental to the survival strategy of the self. And I think something like, to hide, which is what we traditionally did since this whole thing of then even gingers, becoming like the devil's children and all of this thing. And you look at even not too long ago in history of babies from out of wedlock and what would happen to them through like through the Catholics, etc. You know what I mean? Not just to point the fingers at them, but that's the most recent example I can think of. We're slowly getting to the realization that human life is valuable because it's human life. And you hear this powerfully, emotively from campaigners against, because we obviously had a discourse in Parliament recently about assisted suicide, and there was powerful cases made against and for. Most people were conceptually of the idea that suffering shouldn't be allowed, but how do we truly define, and who gets to profess that? And it's such a difficult thing. But I think off the back of that, we then start to look at each other and go, well, we venerate the elderly because we feel that they have lived experience and value, but the living experience of these people that see alternatively are far more valuable. It's the emperor wears no clothes. They're the innocence of the child from the mouths of babes points to the king's nudity, and the empire changes. We need people that just jump out, that say the thing. Everyone else has got this untrained etiquette, and we go, oh, we don't say that, we don't talk about this. But then other people can just literally call it, and that we need that. Otherwise there is this homogenization of human experience, and that leads to, it makes us too controllable. So I think we need the variables, the wild cards, the different thinkers, because if you like the creatives, we're now starting to understand the neuroscience, and it's not to say that the people who are neurotypical are not creative. That's not what I'm saying. But the act of creation is becoming, we're starting to understand, as a form of communication. That actually, if you then can't feel this sense of connection, people are not hearing your words and speaking to you, that you want to manifest and create another thing that is another form of communication,
Yeah. I mean, you said so much there. Part of it is communication between different parts of your own brain as well. And if there's areas where you just simply can't think about because of whatever conditioning you've had, then you're necessarily limited in your communication. I find what's really interesting is the interplay between autistic and non-autistic thinking. Because we need each other. I don't want to be surrounded by autists; they're annoying, and brilliant. And I think when we look at each other and we are charitable and humorous in how we engage with each other's, not just their neurodiversity, but also their traumas, also whatever they're carrying that's brought them to their particular angle, because, there are certain skills that we get through, for example, abuse, performance anxiety, all kinds of stuff, that our life conditions equip us with certain skills later. So yeah, that kind of community level intelligence is what's really interesting. When you talk about like looking at things from one angle, this is the story of Jericho, I think, is that the Israelites arrive, there's walls all the way around the city, so they go round it once, and they go round it again, and they go round it a third time. They look at it from every single angle, and then they blast a trumpet and the walls all fall down, you know?
Mm.
Right. I think that's what we're talking about with this story of how do you overcome something which is defended like that? Or how do you overcome a veil? You know, it's by looking around from all kinds of different ways. So if you try and understand the world as a bunch of economics going this way and that way, you're certainly going to understand certain things, but you're going to miss certain other things. You know, if you try and understand it as psychological trauma, you can, you know, it certainly sheds a light on geopolitics. If you understand it as a you know, a deep-seated human religious urge to sacrifice our children, then you see another kind of perspective on what's going on in geopolitics. You know, and you brought up another thing, which is about valuing other human life. You know, a life is valuable because it's human. When when Australia was first settled, the Aboriginal people were classified as fauna. You know, so they weren't even classified as human. And that was partly a political move to extract their stuff. You know, where I mean, we've been a bit down on the Catholics, but when the Catholics first arrived in South America, they very quickly classified, you know, the Pope fairly quickly after not many years said, look, you're not allowed to kill indigenous people. They are God's natural children. You know, a little bit demeaning, but better than calling them fauna.
Yeah.
Which was what a more, let's say, sophisticated, more rational, more Protestant culture did. You know, the settling of Australia was a much more economically driven thing rather than the zeal of the Catholics and the greed. I mean, obviously, it was mixed up with greed in the conquistadors as well. So they weren't categorized as human. And now we have professors of indigenous thinking telling us how to, or not telling us how to think, offering different perspectives on, you know, how to set up a classroom. You know, why are we arranging it in rows like this? Why don't we sit in a circle like most normal humans arrange themselves in a circle when they're talking? You know, they don't arrange themselves in lines. When you want to arrange someone in lines with a guy at the front who you stand up for when they come in the classroom, you're training people for the military. That's what that system's for, you know. And then, I mean, another area I'm fascinated by is non-human intelligence, and particularly slime molds and mycelia. Because they solve mazes better than humans in some cases. What else do they do?
So I was going to ask you, since you lived in Japan, what's the story with the what was it, the Japanese subway system and a mycelial map?
Yeah, well, the story there, it's slime mold, so it's the yellow one, and the Japanese. I'm going to take this story a little bit back because it's very, very interesting. I started looking into Japanese science for my first book, this one, Science Revealed. And I was kind of interested in why Americans had won so many Nobel Prizes and why Japanese, who had invested about the same amount of money in science, had won so few Nobel Prizes. And because the kind of prize system rewards individual flair, you know? And Japan's not like that. They're very collective people in many, many ways, all across their culture, their linguistics, the way they arrange themselves. You know, when you get on a bus in Japan, everyone moves to make space for you. Doesn't happen in England. It's quite frustrating when I got back home from living in Japan for 6 years. It's like, why aren't these people? Don't they care? You know. So Japanese science. Looks at things a slightly different way. The Japanese were the first people to discover the complex relationships in chimpanzee groups. Whereas the Western scientists had focused on mother-child relationships. They were saying there's this like complex dynamics going across all of them. And they were very good in the slime mold sciences. So these were the guys who studied putting slime molds into mazes and getting them to find their way around them. Now, what they did with the Tokyo railway network is they put oats on a map in the place of where the Tokyo railway stations are, and they let the slime mold colonize the map for it was a day, and in 23 hours the slime molds had created a more efficient network than the Japanese had done. So they basically they spread out, they found out where the food sources were, and then they organized the most efficient way of joining up those places without spreading themselves too thin. I met some people, some mathematicians at All Things Fungi, which is a festival down here in East Sussex. And I was there, I was pimping my reforestation organization, which is called RAIN, and it's inspired by slime molds, and the way it's constructed is modeling what slime molds do, rather than how a lot of charities work, which is a more colonial model of we're going to tell you what to do and we're going to send you money and then you're going to meet these tasks, right? But one of these mathematicians told me something very interesting. So what it's called the traveling salesman problem, which is how you go from, let's say you've got 6 doors to knock on. What's the most efficient route to get through all of these places? Now, we haven't got mathematics to solve that. We haven't worked out what the algorithm is to work out what the best way to go around a bunch of distributed dots is. But bees have worked it out. And bees will, because they have to go around to different sources of food. And what they'll do is one will go and find a source of food, it will come back to its crew, and it will communicate with a dance and with its own language, and then they will kind of be able to map out their area in a way that human beings do. Well, what I find fascinating about one of the things I find fascinating about bees is that in Hebrew the word is Deborah, as in Deborah, the word, the woman's name, and that is the feminine form of dabar or dever, which means word. And it's also, the root of that word is to arrange things in order or to line things up. And if you look at how bees arrange their hives into hexagons and how they use words to communicate with their dances, I think that's a really astute bit of understanding which is embedded in the Hebrew language.
Well, and I think it's like you spoke of when we first started talking there, that we look back in this from throughout history and throughout antiquity, any of these discoveries, any of these old traditions, any of these theological writings, etc. And like you said, they go, oh, they were trying. No, they figured something out. They just, like you said, there isn't the peer-reviewed academic system of scholarship that is known sort of as today. There were people that, through, I would argue, then hyperfixation, hyperfocus, being probably on the spectrum, figuring this shit out. Like people like Darwin and that, going into what he went into. You need that, the obsession of the thing of it. Yeah, you don't have the other science, but through observation, you can start to extrapolate. You get enough data together in a creative mind, and it gives you a solution, but you can't show the working out. I got kicked out of maths so much as a kid because they'd ask a thing, you'd do the thing, and I can't remember how you told me to work it out. So that was the thing I struggled with, was how do I get it right for you, not the answer at the end sort of thing. And I think that's what we're looking at now with going, oh, that word actually means this and that and that. Yeah, they made that the word. And it was that word because somebody else had already come along and gone, oh, it's this. And the next generation would add to that. And you talk interestingly, and I maybe don't want to go into too much of a different sects around the world, but of this idea of the death cults. That we're living in an age where it feels like each generation doesn't add to this collective base, this, as we kind of spoke of in the preamble before we went on board, like the Akashic Records, as it were, the vault of collective knowledge that I believe we draw from. That there is obviously individual knowledge and whatever else, but the spark of creativity, I feel, has to come from a collective something, the whispering of nature, the divine, whatever it may be, you know?
Yeah. I'm working on a piece at the moment, which is it's about Big Bang cosmology and Genesis 1, and particularly looking at the constants of physics, right? Why is gravity exactly the strength that it is? Because if it was any more, then the universe would have gone clump. And if it was any less, it would have dispersed out into hydrogen and maybe a bit of helium if you're lucky. And that's the same for all of the forces of nature. The weak force, the strong force, electromagnetic force, all of them. There's the cosmological constant in the background. There's all this stuff which seems to be already fine-tuned before our universe begins, right? And there's this wonderful idea in it's commentaries on Genesis 1. So Genesis 1, the end of the first day, it's not actually the first day, it says, and it was evening and it was morning, day one. And then the end of the second day is, and it was evening and morning, second day, third day, fourth day, fifth day, sixth day. And the rabbis ask, they say, why wasn't it the first day? Why was it day one and not the first day? Because those are two different words in Hebrew. And one of the answers given is that God created and destroyed worlds over and over again until he found one that pleased him. And you also get that in the text. He says, and God saw that it was good. God said, let there be light. And there was light, and he divided the light from the darkness. God saw that it was good, and it was evening, and it was morning, day one, right? So once he's realized it's good, then you go on to the next day. And then there's another rabbi who says, why does it just start in the evening? Like, our days don't start in the evening, our days start in the morning, right? So, a rabbi comments that the word for evening, which is erev, means disorder, and the word for morning, which is boker, comes from a root which means to perceive or discern, right? So you move from chaos to order with the cycle of each days, right? Now, how this relates to what we're talking about there as, what was it? Where does this creativity come from? Is that I think that there's some dimension in the background where the information is stored. And as far as I understand quantum fields, I don't like talking too much about quantum because you sound like a hippie, but as far as I understand quantum fields, they retain information about everything they've been involved with, which is why particles can be entangled, and it's out of quantum fields that the first subatomic particles emerge, and then they clump together into more and more stuff. So it feels to me like the Akashic records, whatever they may be, are somehow information that's stored from previous iterations, that we can then go and plug into. Because, like, take a guy like Tesla, who took 600 patents, never did a diagram, never bothered with doing any maths. He used to go and, one story about him, which is in this book, is when he's in Budapest Central Park and he's walking along reciting Goethe with a friend of his, and he's frozen to the spot by a vision that he sees with all the clarity of metal, and it's the AC motor, and it's powering my computer. Well, it's not powering my computer, but it's powering the national grids. So where did he get that, and where did he get the wireless communication networks, the Tesla coil that made our TVs? The whole electronic age comes out of the mind of Tesla, and he used to lie down on the couch and go off on one. What you said about hyperfixation is also interesting. There's a great story about Darwin, that he spent so much time studying lichen that when his son met other boys, he would say, what kind of lichen does your father study?
Such a hyper-normalization, wow. It's insight into it again. Of like, this is what I was saying about from birth to then. Every experience you have makes you more you and further from the source. If it's the environment through osmosis that you kind of pick up, is the direct things, like you said, the indoctrination through the almost proto-criminal judicial system of education in terms of its functioning, and the Pavlovian bell and conditioning for different subjects and putting of areas. And the way society constructs itself, religious kind of dogma and belief. But then, the being around the other people. And again, this goes back to the spectrum of humanity being present in the collective spaces, that we need that through osmosis. We need the joy of others. We need the misery of others. We need the insight of others. And if there isn't a collective, what is the point of revelation? And I think society, for some reason, for an underlying whatever, in the technical age, in the digital age as we now are in, it's iteration rather than new innovation. You know, iPhone 17, Fast and Furious 10. I know I keep using them as the references. I don't know if we're probably on Fast and Furious 11 or something by now, an iPhone 19 or something. I don't keep track, but you know what I mean? It's like these things just keep iterating, and it's not for advancement. It's for concentration of capital, greed for greed's sake. And it feels like historically, and there's something within us that these ideas of altruism or whatever that come in conflict with something arises in us of, you know, of greed, of totalitarianism, authoritarian, like, no, but I'm right, you know, and that gets mixed up in religious ideals of being like, God tells me I'm right. Do you know what I mean? Versus then this other line of faith, this other line of creativity, these things that come down, that rain on us, that people go, where did that song come from? It just hit me. I had to write it. I don't know where it came from. The film director that goes, this film idea, like you're saying, that it's, I think you can deconstruct parts and elements to it, but it can only be then constructed in their brain, if that makes sense. It's almost like we're nodes. We need all the nodes of points of consciousness for that to be unique enough for that one spark to come through. I mean, and have been down the rabbit hole for many years now. I'm stuck in the idea of of multiverses and the idea of how actions branch realities. And I think that is in some way intertwined with this, that we can also draw knowledge from realities we're not in. And I think that's part of where this whole, what do they call it, Mandela effect and stuff like that kind of comes into our reality. Of we can draw knowledge from somewhere else that then fundamentally changes almost the reality we're in. And some of us that are more connected to it, not because we're better than or whatever, we're just wired that way or whatever, can feel it. And I think that's the atrophy and the order of the world and the universe just playing around with itself. And to go to your God analogy of the iterations of it, that's what this feels like to me. I've always had this thing since I saw the Truman Show as a kid. It's always fucked me up. Not the idea of like they're coming and filming me in my life or whatever, but the idea of sort of a grander order, not in terms of like a benevolent God, but it's not, I don't believe in intelligence, more an impulse, the impulse to exist for life. I mean, I learned recently about this thing of carnation, crab. It basically means that everything eventually goes into a crab. That's the recent thing. I fall down, like evolutionary, everything just becomes a crab. And putting that into this thing of we're not the max iteration. Human intelligence and our consciousness tells us, or our hubris tells us, we're the height of the evolution. It kind of stops here. And maybe that's the reason the death cult exists, is we don't want to evolve into the next state because our ego and baser instincts are so attached to this. I don't know if that related to what you said before, but that was what I had the impulse to say.
I don't want to be a crab, I can tell you that. Yeah. I mean, the nodes is interesting, isn't it? The media space that we have at the moment, if you compare it to what the media space looked like, let's say 100 years after the invention of the printing press, you know, we're now in this hyperlinked nodal system. So if you wanted to get some information back in the past, you go to a library, you'd find a particular section of the library devoted to your bit of your subject of interest. You'd open your book, you start at the first word, and then you go all the way through a string of characters and a string of symbols all the way to the last word. And that's very much a straight line study, you know. And now when we're looking for information, we might be clicking around from point to point in a effectively infinite space, some of which is complete nonsense, some of which is very astute. And if you ask two different people, they will say that one person will say that something which is astute is nonsense, and vice versa. And then, I mean, when I was writing my second book, I would go on social media and say, I'm interested in this particular, I'm interested in a particular ion channel in the brain. I'm interested in TRPV3 ion channel. Does anyone know about this? you know, and I'd get a whole bunch of responses back, and I'd be able to be in contact with a migraine specialist within a couple of days. So I could kind of incorporate their knowledge into what I was writing, you know. So Paracelsus didn't have that opportunity when he was traveling around Europe in the, what was it, 1500s. So he was meeting lots of people. But the ability to just be able to kind of spread a request out into the hive mind, and then to find a specialist over here and contribute as a specialist over there, is really interesting. And I think this is my fascination with collective intelligence. And that term was first used, as I understand it, by Bruno Latour. He was a guy who was really interested in how different media systems and different language systems, or different technologies of language, change the potentials of what we can do. You know, so for example, the printing press, it allows us to copy knowledge, it allows us to distribute doctrine. Actually, the same way that the Codex, which comes around about 200 BC, changes how we read from. When I say we, I mean literate culture. So in the Middle East, that would have been, if you look at how the Israelites or the early Jews had their scroll. So they had a scroll which would be kept by the community, and it'd be rolled out, and you'd roll it to a certain portion for this particular Saturday, and then you'd read it to the community, and you might interpret the poetry of the text in a certain way, and you'd all have a kind of community conversation around it. And then what happens is you get the Codex. So all these kind of scrolls, these basically rolled up bits of paper, which sometimes had other rolled up bits of paper with them, stuck on pegs in your individual library, would then get pressed into books, things like books, and then they'd be kind of formed into little pamphlets, and they could be distributed. It'd be the Gospel of Thomas, or be the Gospel of John, you know, and they get all distributed around to different churches as that kind of culture of the book spreads out. Then you get like a big ramping up in the with the printing press, and you get the Reformation, you get all of these kind of different ideas emerging from under the rock of the Catholic cult controlled so much of thought for so long, and then suddenly Luther comes along, and these other people are printing stuff, posting stuff, and it's very, very disruptive. And we've got something very similar today, right? So I was just listening to something this morning about actually about Michael Jackson, and stuff coming out about how he was not the paedophile he was made out to be, you know. And this is a kind of there were some recent pictures put out on the internet with him with a bunch of children, but the whole internet was like, that was the children he was looking after. You know, these were pictures from his own collections, etc. So, you know, we've now got this. You mentioned the kind of panopticon. In some ways, it's quite scary. In some ways, it's quite good for us to be accountable to the public. Give me 1 second. My door's just rang. 1 second, yeah?
Yeah, I'll pause it.
Yeah, so just to finish that thought, you know, we have this idea of words on a page being truth, which is very much a gift from the Jewish people to the rest of the world. So I've been running up and down the stairs. And it meets its kind of final expression in 3.5 million documents being released about shadowy forces controlling all of politics. And now everyone can read them. So that's a kind of interesting story from the beginning all the way to the end.
Yeah, it's the oral tradition. I mean, I think history's got it wrong, but obviously we can only, because of the reality that we live in, obviously you need the evidence to then state. Obviously, I would say that given recent revelations that the modern Homo sapien is at least 300,000 years old and 150,000 years older than we thought it was, that the idea of us first writing shit down where we did isn't quite right to me. Obviously, China and the history of paper and whatnot, obviously we kind of used plants in a different way prior to that, and I believe that knowledge didn't just manifest out of fucking nowhere. But my point being that we basically relied on the oral tradition for so goddamn long. Like I said, this thing came about that was a sacred word. When it got tied up with the idea of something beyond the larger of the collective, it then had power within itself, and it was powerful because it was limited. Then when it became more widespread, it became accessible. Obviously, literacy rates took a long fucking time for the world. Sorry, cat tried to high-five me from the chair underneath me. It took for the world to actually catch on because of obviously feudalistic systems, etc., and religious doctrine not wanting to allow peasant classes access to such knowledge. They then came to, I believe, understand that, wait a minute, the word is locked. When they hear us talking about it, like you described before, when they pull it out, everyone in the crowd can interpret it. They can discuss it and go, I believe it's this, I believe it's that. But then when it became about you and the word that could then be expanded in the book to then, so you, by the end of the book, you would believe what they've put in the book. Or do you know what I mean? You'd be indoctrinated almost into that idea, or in some way affected by it, and it became this thing that through that became another form of social control. And like you say, that I think because of the decolonizing of information through the internet, they're then now doing the same again, going, okay, give them everything, and it's that Russian thing of hyper normalization, described by Adam Curtis in his documentary Hypernormalization, of just kind of flood the zone with shit, as the Steve Bannon's been talking about more recently. And that kind of breaks then the power of the word. And like you said, the Epstein files I think it was reported by Channel 4, that might only be 4% of the files, which is an insanity. And obviously with the redactions and everything else, they're still trying to hold on to it, but it feels like, that another bubble of knowledge is collapsing. And I think this is where things like social IDs, banning kids from the internet, all of these things are coming from. They're being presented as good and beneficial to the collective tribe of humanity, as it were, that it'll help lessen some of the damage of the technology that's been thrust upon us by capital, to, air quotes, better our lives. They're then going to use that to narrow that information again, to then go, no, the internet's allowed, but there's only the 5 publishers. And they become the monotheistic institutions, which is what the news agencies enjoyed for so long. And I think we're just witnessing that war of the collective. And I can't help but feel that there is something to... It's why school works well, why you're in a classroom with 30 kids, because that mass indoctrination, do you know what I mean? It's you all believe it and you go, I don't want to, I'm not going to put my hand up if I believe 29 other people in the class believe that, do you know what I mean? And it's that over time, that indoctrination, that saturation of culture, of hyper normal, until you just go, yes, sir, thank you, sir. You play your role. You live out what they've determined for you. And I think, as you were describing before, like the grids rather than the circle is equal. The grid means, back, right, third, I can measure you. There's a famous Simpsons episode where there's the Bart hall, where there's Bart in the middle of the classroom and it's showing all the fallen grades, and it's like a cone, and Homer, I think, shouts through it or something. But it's things like that. It's for metrics. It's for measurement. It's for economizing of human activity for capital's end. You know what I mean? We're not getting overly Marxist.
I'm not sure about school working well anymore. It seems to be like, I know in California, something like half of the parents, if I've understood this right, are raising their homeschooling their kids. I've got an American friend here who's just delighted that she doesn't have to worry about her small children going through metal detectors at school. So it feels like that indoctrination technique just isn't really going to work anymore. And I think there's something else here as well about how language has evolved over time. And you can look at this a couple of different ways. One of the things I'm fascinated by is what happens when an inherently poetic language, like Hebrew, the Afro-Asiatic languages, a book is written in that format. So we're talking about the Old Testament here. The way to interpret the Old Testament is basically whatever you can get away with in the text, or certainly that's how it was done originally. And you can get vastly the way the words work. There's only about there's a very limited number of root words in Hebrew. So it means that one word has to cover quite a lot of ground. So, for example, when you read about I was reading yesterday about this word for, which is in Genesis is translated variously as, God made the whales, God made the sea monsters. The word is long things, right? So what is it? It could be loads of things.
Dinosaurs.
Yeah, exactly. The word is, so it makes, so that, and also the very, very flexible grammar where tenses work completely differently, and you don't know if I am that I am means I was what I was, or I will be what I will be, or I am what I will be. All of those are permissible in the Hebrew, or in kind of biblical Hebrew interpretation. And the way that the Jewish tradition evolved was to congratulate the weirdest and wackiest ways of interpreting the text. So it wasn't so much about what does the world, what is, how do things work in the world, but it's how can you interpret text to mean stuff that can shed light on the dynamics of your community, or how things work in the world, or whatever it might be, and then you get this translation over to Greek with the New Testament, but it's also from Afro-Asiatic to Indo-European, and in Indo-European languages, things are either one thing or other. This is why Aristotle's laws of thought are, there is no excluded middle. Something is either this or it's that, right? It can't be a bit of both. Whereas in Hebrew, it most certainly can. And then you get like the paradoxes. Was it Zeno comes along with his paradox, and he says, when does, if I'm dropping grains of sand, when does it become a pile? Because it's not a pile at the beginning and it is a pile at the end. So at what point is it, we go from one to the other? When does Achilles catch the tortoise is another one, and yeah, so you've got that kind of movement in the language of the book, at the same time. Well, and then that second book gets picked up as a tool of empire, and then it exports itself all over the world. But then you've also got this, like in the Greek, in the Homeric texts, for example, you've got two different registers of language. You've got mythos and you've got logos. And gods and heroes speak mythos. They speak in poetic language. And everyone, normal people talk in logos. Yeah. And in mythos is poetic. And if you look back in all of the the earliest texts in pretty much every language are poetic. That means that the next word is chosen by how it fits in with rhythm, how it fits in with sometimes rhyme schemes or alliteration or whatever the poetics of that particular language are, right? Which is very different to logos, which is the next word is chosen because it's a logical, rational extension of where you're going, which is very much like how ChatGPT talks. That being the full extent, like the extreme extension of that kind of logical, rational way of thinking. So we have lost over time a poetic and much broader and much more fertile way of looking at words, looking at text. You see that in these arguments between fundamentalist evangelical Christians and atheists who are kind of arguing over whether dinosaurs are, put there by God to trick us, or, and both of those groups are interpreting a book which is not meant to be interpreted literally, or at least is not only meant to be interpreted literally. The rabbis were talking about this like hundreds of thousands of years ago, that this is clearly not meant to be interpreted literally. But we've come to this kind of literalist, we've come to this literalist, excuse me, Tom can wait. Sorry, Tom. We've come to this kind of hyper unpoetical way of legalistically and rationally interpreting stuff. It's a real poverty.
It's this. What hit me there was this idea of, like, again, to take the three states of sort of intelligence, as it were. The three languages could be a thing to sort of describe it. Of science, academia, scholastic pursuit. These are the language of the heart, of the head. This poetry, this mythos. This is the language of the heart. The heart is forgiving. The heart can allow for things. It can allow for sacrifice. It can choose suicide. The brain cannot. It's not really. I mean, there's obviously certain situations where it's logical. Like being torn apart by zombies or whatever. You get your last bullet in your gun. I've obviously watched a zombie movie recently. It's where that came off the top of my brain. But what I mean? It can be logical in that sense per se. But then it can be truly rationalized in the heart. Do you know what I mean? And I think that's what the texts probably were. They were designed in some way, yes, with the limitations of the linguistics of the day and the understanding of the populace, but to be ambiguous in a way, or to be allowed to be ambiguously interpreted because of the spectrum of humanity. As we were saying before, if there wasn't this difference of neurodivergency and neurotypical individuals, the understanding by the priestal class prior to the monotheistic faiths would have been this idea that they weren't ever trying to truly create empire and all that we have now, because it was prior to nation states as we know them. It was about the health and wealth of the tribe, the collective, the movement, the group. And so I think they wanted there to be that, because then it also created that discourse, that conversations. And through that, yes, there came conflict, but you need conflict for resolution, and resolution binds. And so I think there's utility to that we don't understand today. We see disagreement is conflict always, rather than it just being, oh no, I think differently to you. Oh, well, you're saying I'm wrong. Like, it's become that binary, I think, in an over-reliance in the language of the head and the language of the heart, because then in the modern way of sort of the phrasing of it, I mean, there's very few people that are venerated in the modern poetry that are seen universal, like someone like Benjamin Zephaniah or someone like that, that's really, or in the mainstream, because poetry's then classed as like the classics and antiquity, and that's upper class stuff, you know what I mean? Whereas that's the language of the heart, and if you can open people's hearts, you can open their fucking minds.
Interesting.
I feel like there's something to that.
Yeah, I mean, there's that New Testament idea that the greatest of the virtues is charity. Charity being tolerance of other people's ways of being, and tolerance of yourself, I think, as well. When you've had a bad day and you've gone and said something really stupid, and then you've got enough flexibility with yourself to go and apologise rather than double down and be more of an idiot. That thing about conflict and resolution is interesting as well. The word for peace in Hebrew is shalom, and the root of that word is a word which means reparations. Yeah. So if I steal your goat and I get busted and I have to give you back 2 goats, that's salam, right? That's so the peace is not the absence of conflict. The peace is the resolution which happens after the conflict, which is, as you say, binding, you know. And you get that in like in the oldest story, the story of Gilgamesh. You know, he meets someone, he fights him, and then they become best mates, right? That's how you do that. In fact, I found that with a lot of the people I'm destined to get on with, to be quite close friends, especially when I was younger. I would immediately argue with them when I first met them. And it's something about the charge that was between 2 people. And because I'm stupid and subject to, basic influences, I'm thinking, what is this charge? Oh, it's probably aggression. You know, it's probably, do I want to fight this person? Do I want to screw this person? Do I want to run away? Do I want to eat it? Do you know what I mean? So when you get that charge, you like interpret like that. But I found that like a lot of my closest friends we've had an immediate spark when we first met and had a bit of a go.
I think in modern society, the infrastructure is set against us having those positive spark interactions. I think we're seeing the end result of it, but it's always kind of been there. This thing of like breaking unions, taking away third spaces, commodifying every asset so that there isn't time or money or want after a long enough period for us to connect. I think I rant about it every fucking week. I'm going to do it again. This little thing, these bloody boxes, the illusion of connection, and it's disconnecting us, and we can't see each other. We can't have that charitability for each other. We can't even be charitable to ourselves because we're looking and going, oh, look at that billionaire. Why don't I have all the stuff he has? Well, because you're not a fucking billionaire. Like, but your brain is being hacked every day by it, and we're seeing the world through the prism of this, and because this can be directly influenced in such odd ways now through things that are not human. Because of the algorithms, through then these AI influence that's starting to move into absolutely everything. At least before that, I'm just worried that, because it's the whole thing of like, do you remember as a kid that went, oh, you'll never have a calculator in your pocket always, so you've got to learn this obscure mathematical formula. Well, phones, but now with Google and ChatGPT and other chatbots, are people really learning the knowledge, as you described before, of going to the library, getting the scroll off the thing, and the ancient world are now going to a library or whatever? The whole process is educational. The whole process is learning. The whole process also, I feel, adds more weight to the knowledge that you then acquire. So then it fits better into the matrix of your understanding of reality. Whereas if you can just Google, oh, that actor was in this thing, next time the question comes up, you'll go, oh, I have to Google boom. And at what point is then AI and this collective intelligence that we're creating through the digital age at conflict with sort of the ideas we spoke of the Akashic records, of this collective intelligence of, as Rupert Sheldrake described, like the morphic resonance, this field, this binding thing.
And what forces are involved in constructing the sets which teach those machines what to think?
Mm-hmm.
You know, there was this this guy I've known for quite a few years who asked me for a palm reading maybe about a year ago now. And I said, yeah, okay, blah, blah, blah. And we were setting it up. And then he says, this is what ChatGPT has to say about palmistry. I was like, okay, here we go. And it was, there is no empirical evidence for the claims of palmistry. And I looked into it. There's journal articles on the morphology of the hand and psychology going back to the 1880s. Hundreds of articles, stuff on fingerprints and personality types. Your fingerprints are a record of how your fingers are moving around in your first environment, which is the amniotic fluid, and the wrinkles that are left as your growth factors are pushing out on these balloons that on the end of your fingers, which then shrink in the middle trimester. That leaves a record of how your fingers are wiggling around, how the morphogens and various forces are growing, and how you interact with your environment. All of this has been studied. There's tons of evidence on the length of your third finger in relation to your first finger. Third finger grows under the influence of testosterone, for example. People with longer third fingers. Most humans have longer third fingers. 1 in 10 has a longer first finger, and they tend to be quite bossy. But the third finger is, you're more likely. The longer it gets, the more likely you are to start your own business, end up in prison, have more children, all that kind of stuff. There's tons of it, but Chat GPT had just decided not to look at it. But what was really illuminating about this interaction was I got back to this guy and I didn't really know what to say for a while, but I ended up writing an article about it, which I put on my Substack, which was about palmistry and how the algorithm extends our distrust of traditional knowledge systems into this kind of, it does your thinking for you, and it's stupid, and it's racist. Anyway, so I wrote this article, I sent it to him, and he sent me this email, and after about word 3, I was like, man, you didn't write this. And it was something like, your article was interesting, eye-opening, and, oh, I see, you're using 3 adjectives. You don't do that. I know how you write. And it got kind of halfway through this quite long email saying, you'd be surprised to know that I got ChatGPT to help me write this email. Mm-hmm. And to help you analyze the response which I'd written to this, you are lost, mate. How much of your brain, how much of your thinking are you outsourcing to your computer as you get more and more stupid? But what I want to ask you, I think, is where do you think? I mean, we've been rapping here for a good while about how snarled up and ossified. I wonder if calcified is the everything tends to crabs word that you're looking for. I'm
gonna look this up. I keep forgetting. Sorry, continue.
Where do you think it goes next? Do you it feels to me like something's giving way, but what do you think?
I think the influence of the transhumanists and posthumanists can't be underestimated. Oh, I froze up. I'm back. Can't be underestimated. People like Elon Musk and that are so lost to the idea of the joy of living, of the collective experience of what Earth can be in the Eden, to use, your biblical parable, and so sure of the idea that they are in that manifest destiny kind of tradition, they are the new gods. They get to dictate the direction of human evolution. And I think, that's going to kind of create, and we're seeing this already with AI and everything else, the more they try and force down on us, yes, a lot of people will outsource it. because the human body, the same with all life, it's that thing of why is a soap bubble round? It's round because it's the most energy efficient. Like humans will economize in that sense. If I can do a job in half an hour that could have taken me 4 hours before, you bet your ass I'm doing that in half an hour and telling the boss it still took me 4 hours. Like, there's just something in us that will do that. Why wouldn't we? Especially if we have an understanding of our own mortality and the limitation of our own sort of life expectancy and experience, etc. And I think that there's a growing backlash, and we're going to break off into tribes, not of of gender, not of even class per se, not of race or ethnicity or anything like that, but of ideas of faith in what the future should look like. Because I saw something the other day and it hit me so fucking hard. It was a roundtable debate and it was just a clip when I was scrolling. I'll admit, hands up, I still get stuck scrolling. Fucking demon drug, gives you all the dopamine, that little thumb hit. And it was a guy basically saying, do you know how bad you have to fuck up an environment for mammals to not want to reproduce? Yeah, my generation and younger, I know nobody that's got a kid other than they had heavy religious parents, or they were brought up in quite a religious household. They knock up the lass and they don't have the abortion. But everyone else I know, abortion is more normalized than, or even now just not having sex. Not through being incel, like an incel or anything like that per se, but just it's too difficult. The requirements of it, the gatekeepers of the apps, of the technology, basically going, no, here's the ones you're going to look at, rather than actually, well, if you went outside, you could bump into a person and they live near you. That immediately you find someone on the internet, but they're 300 miles away or whatever. Like it's we've disconnected from these things. I think so. The tech is still being sold to us that this is good for you. This is making your lives better. We're economizing, efficiency. And people are just starting to go, well, for what though? I don't have any more time. I don't have any more care. I don't have any more love or any more connection in my life. I just have this shit that every time I breathe, a billionaire gets richer. Every time I move, he gets richer. And they're all part of either death cults. Like, I know obviously there's the sort of, with you being Jewish, I know if you're anti-Zionist, I didn't want to turn this into a conversation about Zionism, but like the American evangelicals and what they've kind of done with the presidents that they've supported and the movements over there and kind of what is sort of, everybody is moving towards apocalypse, their version of. And it terrifies me that that's where the wealth is concentrated over the past 2 centuries. Every beneficiary of the past industrial revolutions have gone to fewer and fewer hands. And there is that thing that the money almost is an illness, like we've spoken this before, the Wetico, like the Native American tribe, I can't remember which tribe, not Cherokee, can't remember the tribe off the top of my head, term for like the illness the Europeans had. This cannibalizing greed, this need to consume and own and have. That these people have that illness within them, and the more they get, the more sure they are, and the more they're on Forbes, and the more we go, you're brilliant. And they have one person's ideas can never be enough for humanity, like you said. But then all they get is the yes men getting paid along the way, and the demonization of alternative thought, the censorship of alternative thought. And so I can't see us going, we need a catastrophe. Like the 90s were pretty good to us in giving us like Deep Impact and stuff like that, or Contact movies where something happened and all the humans went, oh shit, we need to get on that. We need we need to get on that moment. But it doesn't even seem like war is enough anymore. The collective apathy, the limitation of access to information because we, are modulated through the algorithm of your phone, your social media feed. It's trained to keep you just angry enough to engage, but not angry enough to do anything. And swimming in that anger over time, I feel, to speak of the thing, this is all in the language of the head. There is no language of the heart, to speak of what we were speaking of before, that we're not seeing a reason to want to continue. Does that make sense? Do you know what I mean?
It does, yeah. It's a dark vision, but
sorry, I didn't mean it to be. Yeah, I'm being honest. I'm still the optimist that believes that collectively, I mean, I'm still hoping for a solar flare. One big enough that it EMPs most of the satellites, and we have that time again. We step outside, rub our eyes, and go, oh, we need food. All right, you got ground, you got shovel. All right, you got seeds. Sweet, let's do this. Like just moments where we require each other. Whereas the story of neoliberal capitalism has been you versus everybody else. Your loss is my gain. So the more you suffer, the more I must be better off. I look higher because you're now lower.
Yeah, I got a friend who was in Spain when the lights went out for 3 days or however long it was,
Mm.
and he managed to get to the supermarket just before it closed. Got a couple of bottles of wine, sat out with his girlfriend, and saw the stars like he'd never seen them before. Um, and the two, the way he describes it was just really interesting. He's like, "Is this it?" You know? Um, yeah, I think Charles Eisenstein is really good on this. He says the apocalypse will not save you. Yeah, there is work to be done now. In my case, it's definitely slowing down. You've got this wonderful bio-Kumalafe idea that we've got to, things are urgent. You've got to hurry up and slow down. The thing about efficiency, man, I spent about an hour and a half yesterday repairing a basket, as I was speaking to my girlfriend on the phone. And I've never repaired a basket. I've never had time to repair a basket, right? I've got books to write. I've got like my landlord breathing down my neck. I've got tons of stuff to do, but I repaired a basket. And the last 3 times I took mushrooms, I organised my house, and my house is getting crazy. Like I've got bits of wood all over the walls. Like I just replaced a drawer for no good reason, except that I was cross with it. So I put a crazy bit of branch on it. Anyway, I think that I think we would be foolish to think there's not some kind of a crunch on its way. I don't think we need to pray for a cataclysm. I think it's on its way. A Carrington event, that would be certainly interesting. One of the interesting things about a Carrington event is it depolarizes, it doesn't just fry your machines, it depolarizes your magnetic field. And when you when you reduce the magnetic field around someone's brain, they start to sense presences, they start to see visions, all the kind of things that happens on the way into a migraine or the way into an epileptic fit starts to happen. So there can be terror, there can be deja vu, there can be all of that kind of stuff. So yes, that would be extremely interesting if that happened. But I don't think the apocalypse saves you. I think you've got to and I don't think panicking saves you either. I think, and I don't mean you, I mean me. I think that building community in the way that we can, like creating currency in the way that we can, i.e., love rather than money, with people around us, is kind of where it's at. And there's this other Eisenstein idea, which is that the apocalypse is already here. It's just not evenly distributed. I work with indigenous groups in Brazil, black women's groups in Brazil, and formerly enslaved communities. And these guys have been on the business end of empire for hundreds of years. And one of the reasons I work with them is not really out of charity, let's say, but these guys who've managed to survive that onslaught on their environments, on their cultures, on their bodies as well in times of slavery, they've got resources that we just haven't got. We simply haven't got. So if there's any kind of way forward, it's drawing on the adaptive powers of the cultures that have been around for a while and have been through what we're starting to go through now, i.e., it's quite a shock to us to learn that our government are absolute monsters, right? I mean, it's not a shock to me, but it's quite a lot. It's quite a shock to other people. You don't need to tell indigenous people that, right? You don't need to tell West Africans that, So, and I think there's something here about radical optimism, or no, maybe not even optimism, radical cheeriness, like, and if it is our phones which is making us unhappy, which it is, then I think that's really where we start. How can we get creative? How can we get, I mean, I'm really interested in altered states. That's why I'm so fascinated by hypnosis, and it's my day job. I treat migraine and I treat dermatitis and I treat all that kind of stuff. But what I'm really most excited about is group hypnosis, getting together a whole bunch of people and doing a hypnotic induction where everyone goes, whoa, what the fuck was that? When we do between We've done it at a few festivals, and there'll be a door opening up in a cloud. Someone will have gone into a dream. Someone's had a reverie where they've met Eastern Europeans in tracksuits. Someone's seen a mantid creature in the image. And this is no drugs, no nothing. It's about 5 minutes of an image and me talking slowly in poetry, right? 3 minutes maybe. You can drop into those spaces of incredible potential within seconds. And I don't know, the history of hypnosis is really informative on this, because you've got a whole series of social reformer hypnotists who did things like started free schools, or there's a guy, John Elliotson. He's a fascinating character. He's a guy who introduced a stethoscope to England. I think we're talking about the 1830s, around then. And he was a hypnotist. He presented a report of a surgery under hypnosis to the Royal Medical and Surgical Society, of which he used to be president. And they said, no, you must be mistaken. There's an amputation of a man's thigh under hypnosis. No, doctor, you must be mistaken about this. He went and wanted to kind of present hypnosis to the great and the good of medicine, of the medical community. And he took this woman, Elizabeth Oakey, into his presentation, into his demonstration at the University College Hospital. She was great. He used to take her around the wards. This was a working class young woman. And she would go into a trance and diagnose people on the wards. And there's a story of how she diagnosed, there's 12 people on the ward. She diagnoses 9 of them and then doesn't diagnose the other 3. And the doctor says to her afterwards, why didn't you diagnose the other 3? And she says, because the angel of death was at the foot of their beds. And all 3 of them died by the following morning. Now, this woman, when she goes into trance in front of the Lancet and all the journals of London Medical Society, and he's doing all the normal things. He's putting pins through getting full body catalepsy, where she's like stiff as a plank, and he puts her head on a chair and her feet on a chair and gets men to stand on her, all that kind of stuff. And then she starts pointing at men's trousers, and she starts laughing at men's trousers and making lewd jokes. And this is like a demure working class lady in the company of gentlemen who wasn't meant to do that. And then she refuses to come out of trance until the assistant, Mr. Foot, brings her out of trance. And you see this over and over again, like with these, the hypnotic state, it just seems to pause all of the, or at least some of the, let's say, super egos in positions on what we can think and what we can do. And suddenly the bets are off and you can do what you like. You can imagine what you like. You can influence your imagination. You can deal with your anxiety. I know someone whose girlfriend was, he met a woman. He was having a few dates with her. She kept on at one point he asked her, "What's wrong with your eyes, man?" Her eyes were always streaming, and she goes, "Oh, I think you've got a cat, and I'm really allergic to cats." And so when she came round, he used to have to clean his house for days and get rid of all the cat hair and stuff. She had one hypnosis session, and she's not allergic to cats anymore. The two of them live together with the cat. You can do amazing things just by talking to someone or listening or imagining in the right way. And I think, when we're locked inside causality and our kind of phone consciousness and all of the other things, all of the kind of, particularly with England to be the class system, when we hear someone who has a certain type of accent, who's reading the news, we think it's true, and you hear like a Geordie or a Welshman speaking, and there's a different kind of reaction. And
it's interesting. Geordie is quite often ranked as the best voice for call centers.
Oh, really? Interesting, isn't it? I mean, the layers of conditioning which have put us in that situation where, I guess that's saying Geordies make good working class, reliable folk.
They'll fight for you. They're like, "Oh, I'll get your pet. We aye."
Yeah. That kind of thing. So all of that can just collapse within minutes with the right kind. And it does. And it happens even when like a gentleman doctor like Elliotson, who was great, but he didn't think he could be hypnotized because he was a gentleman. So he's coming with all his class biases, but the hypnotic state wasn't having it at all. And then you find also that I've been in I've been in states where I follow this guy Milton Erickson, And he was quite into the generative state. He said, you should go into a trance. You should take your client into a trance. And I've quite often gone into a hypnotic session. I won't really know what I'm going to say. I'll be in a trance. I might go on a journey, and I've come out of them. And like I remember this one that I took someone into this tarot card called the Hermit, and we were going across a field of wheat, and there was a tree, and there was a crystal hanging in the tree, all of this kind of stuff. And I came out and he said, all that really happened. Like he had actually, in his life, some years back, had been walking across a field. He'd found a crystal hanging in a tree, and like there's a space between the two, or between us, which is this collective intelligence, and you can access it all kinds of different ways, and it's totally revolutionary, and it just tears apart that nonsense. It's kind of, it's a bit like love, but it's not like the intensity of erotic love with an individual, but I guess it's agape or something, and the Greeks would have a better word for it than we do.
It's an intimate connection that isn't in that sense of. I mean, the language is tapered into everything then being sexual because sex sells under capitalism. But I entirely understand what you're saying. It's interesting. I was thinking there that there's almost a directional problem for modern science. That I've always kind of been skeptic on hypnosis of kind of, but when I've thought about it sort of in the more recent past, it kind of makes sense from my own experiences of meditation, of yogic practice, of taking, frankly, a lot of LSD. Me and one of my friends have spoken with this quite a few times on the podcast before. We did every Sunday for a year on acid sessions together. And now, still God, 8, 10, 11 years, whatever it is past, still see each other several times a week, you know what I mean? And there isn't a need to speak on most things. There is a direct understanding, a simpatico of desire. Kettle, just get the coffees appear. You know what I mean? A joint appears. There isn't a need to order events or anything like that. And I found that with people that I've tripped with, especially in more smaller setting, especially deliberate setting. And I think it comes from the same as when we look at the psychoanalytics. We're saying that your brain does this and that results in your consciousness doing this. I am of the belief your consciousness drives your chemistry. And the same is true of what we were learning about epigenetics. So the thing with the cat, as you spoke of before, I believe in some which way that is attached to an epigenetic switch.
Okay.
There's something that you can rewire that body. Look at Wim Hof. Do you know what I mean? Through his own persistence. Yes, there's genetic adaptations and measuring it in science and going, oh my God, look at that. And you're like, yeah, but was he that and he discovered that? Or did he do that? And another element that I was thinking is, again, of like women lifting cars off babies. You know what I mean? And there's a thing in the body of like, if your muscles in your legs were truly allowed to operate as they could, it'd snap you in half. There's a part of your brain that has to, at all times, make sure your legs don't snap you. Like, do you know what I mean? And you think then, so all of the, so then if they're systems that are not then on our cognitive system as we understand it, because we're limiting it thinking on, to use the higher vibration scale, as it were, that you can access these other things, and then through deliberate intention, through ritualistic practice, through mastery, you can do things that on the surface to the average human look impossible, look magic, and I think that's part of what hypnosis is it's a radical empowering of the individual to take autonomy of their own life. And so I think in that way it's valuable. I think it's and this leads us actually, because we're going to round up in the next sort of 15, 20, because I'm trying to keep this to 2 hours. I'm definitely going to get you back just so we can talk about war and drugs, because that's a whole other topic. But I do want to ask you, because we're leading on to it. Obviously, you're a palmist, you do hypnosis, etc. Why do you feel, and how do you feel sort of like the media and social viewing of it, when, as we've just discussed there is science to it, it's just it doesn't fit in with the traditional model or what's become the modern pharmacopic model of medicine?
Yeah, it's propaganda. It's a very, very good psyop, I think. Historically, so I was telling you that story about the 1830s with hypnosis. A whole series of researchers did what's called mesmeric anesthesia for the next about 20 years. One of them, probably the greatest, was a guy called James Esdale. He looked after hospitals in Calcutta, I think 5 hospitals in Calcutta, learnt hypnosis, was hypnotizing his patients, and then doing like cataract operations, penis operations, amputations of legs and stuff. And something like, it was in the hundreds. It was hundreds of documented major operations done. And he presented his findings to the Royal Society. They said, the simple-minded Hindu is easily tricked, right? As you're cutting their cataract out, right? Then what happens is chloroform. So patients start asking doctors about hypnosis, because imagine you're going to a dentist, you're about to have a tooth torn out, and they're saying, "Can I have hypnosis, please? Because I've heard about this thing which takes your pain away," and it takes it away in minutes, and it's easy because you can. We were talking about before. What is it that makes a woman be able to lift a car off her child? It's exactly that. It's your frontal lobes. Your frontal lobes are constantly limiting your expression of power, and various different bits of your brain are filtering what comes in and what goes out. Is what we were talking about before. It's what my whole second book, Apocalyptic, is about. This one. So there's a dentist who gets asked about hypnosis, and he says, "I've got something even better. I've got I can't remember if it was chloroform or ether, but it was one of the two. It was a gas which explodes if you're not careful. It gives you liver damage. It doesn't do some of the other good stuff which hypnosis does. Like, one of the reasons mesmeric anesthesia was so good is because not only do you cut off pain, but you can reduce blood flow. Yeah. So when you with operations in the time, they had a mortality rate of something like 45%. Because there'd be blood loss and there would be sepsis and there'd be all these kind of things. You had to pin a man down and saw his leg off. And, you couldn't even use alcohol because that would make the blood flow increase rather than decrease. Now, with hypnosis, you don't need to pin him down. You just need to talk him down. And then you can also, even when I hypnotize someone, without even trying to reduce blood flow, you see the pallor of one of the things you look out for is the pallor of the skin changes because the way the blood flow changes, right? So you affect it very, very directly. It's a little bit like how if you think of your favorite food, your mouth will water because your imagination affects your glands. And if you think about, your leg being in a bucket of cold water, like a bucket of ice, and I work on that, then it becomes numb. Like, why shouldn't it? So then what happens is when anesthetics become available, then there's a battle between hypnotism, and anesthesia, or chemical anesthesia. Anesthesia actually didn't used to mean chemicals. It used to mean, and if you look at old medical dictionaries, they'll say any means of numbing part of the body, whether that's chemical or hypnotic. Yeah. Now we think of anesthesia, we think about chemistry. That was an op by drug companies and by kind of more properly at that point it was doctors' authority. Because if you've got the drugs and you've got the machine to kind of pump this stuff in and out of somebody's lungs and keep them alive whilst they're anesthetized, then you can control something. And if you've got bone setters and herbalists and wise women and women midwives and all these other people who've been talking kindly and with intention to their subjects since the beginning of medicine, there's never been a time when we haven't administered medicine along with incantation. If you look in the Greek magical texts, or if you look in Egyptian papyri, it's always done with words. Even when a mum gives her kid, rubs on a dock leaf onto nettles, she's saying soothing words. It's so obvious, and now we think of that as being placebo effect and we try and remove it from medicine. But anyway, there was a battle and hypnotists were pushed outside of it. And since then, because the hypnotism comes out of the same matrix as spiritualism, table rapping, automatic writing, all of that kind of stuff's going on in the 1800s and even earlier with mesmerism. And it's kind of when science is very interesting at that point because they've got this methodology of studying stuff like seances, for example, with trying to do control experiments and stuff like that, you know, and a lot of the pioneers of our world. Like there's a guy here lives in Hastings or used to live in Hastings. John Logie Baird is the guy who invented TV. And he was a spiritualist and he reckoned he got the instructions from Thomas Edison, who died, and gave him the instructions. You get this like Rutherford, you get it with, what's her name? Marie Curie, you know, these people are all studying spiritualism. Wallace as well, who's the guy who came up with the theory of evolution by natural selection in a couple of days when he was in a malarial fever, and sent it to Darwin, who'd been studying it for 20 years, and went, oh my God, I've got to publish, even though I haven't been able to work out the fine details of the fossil record, you know. Like he was a spiritualist as well. My point is that science and spiritualism were not, at the beginning of science, or beginning of kind of experimental science, they were absolutely part of the same thing. And as we've moved forward, mainly the capital interests, I think, have tried to push that kind of uncontrollable element. And what's really interesting, actually, I think, is that the same things which are coming up now, or came up in the last century, are what the Gnostics were criticized for. So it's action at a distance, it's unauthorized healing, invisible stuff, you know. So like homeopathy, for example, is another one that's been very, very roundly criticized. Historically, homeopaths were blackballed from medical societies. There was a massive campaign against homeopathy, you know. I've got a whole chapter in Science Revealed about the science of homeopathy, and not so much exactly more about the scientific controversies and how they were settled around homeopathy. Like talks about a guy called Benveniste, who was the head of basically the French NHS intern, and he got asked to do experiments on high dilutions. As he said, but they don't work because it violates Avogadro's number. And the Homeopathic Association said, we didn't ask you for your opinion, we asked you to do experiments. And so he did them, and he did like 250 experiments, closed his doors for years, got all of these replications, really fascinating stuff, like including as you continue to dilute the medicine, the effects on what he's doing is he's kind of counting basophils down a tube. So it's like he's an immunologist, but the effect kind of goes down as you expect, and it goes up, and then it goes down, and it goes up with continued dilutions. You get this like periodic wave. And anyway, he got his funding cut. He got like criticized in the press. All of this kind of stuff, you know. So where we were going, we were talking about hypnosis and why it got pushed out of medicine.
So why it got pushed out of medicine, and I've got a couple of follow-ups. So about it, you obviously know the timeline a hell of a lot better than I do. Obviously, I can kind of tie that into a lot of research I've done around kind of the exploitation of Parvera somnorum, the opium poppy, and kind of the creation of opioids and the creation of the hypodermic needle in the mid-1800s, and standardization of drugs in kind of hydrochloric forms and measurable results, etc. And that standardization, part of that I feel comes there's a religious element or a spirit. The turning of science, I feel like, in the early days, the inquisitive mind, they were the same thing, and they almost tried to use modern science to prove traditional spirituality, and where they couldn't because of either limitations or, I don't know, lack of knowledge or access or whatever, they kind of moved away, and the things that didn't get brought with it into that kind of coalescence, and then the things that they could prove, as it were, equals prove with their science, that then became the new modern doctrine. And it is this faith in medicine. And they talk about the placebo effect. What is that placebo effect? If you had that faith in your witch doctor, like I've been reading a few of, I'm going to butcher your name, is it Chebe? I can't remember his first name. He's a Nigerian writer from the mid-1900s. Read a few of his books, Arrow of God and... Ooh, it escapes me. But in in Arrow of God, he's talking about this faith, the healer of kind of the village, and it's the arrival of the white man, and kind of the breaking down and the distrust and heritage versus kind of new ways of being. And I think that's quite true of what happened with medicine. Is there was these traditional knowledge that was just known. Yeah, that plant does this, or that bit you use this, or you go to sleep. Like, and it become now we talk like old wives' tales, or like the hand you think of your grandma. Maybe not this generation, probably don't, but my grandma was probably the last of that generation that had this knowledge that was counterintuitive to what we were being told by the capitalist system. You were sold this product, but your nan would go, no, 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 newspaper and vinegar. Or this and that and that and that. Do you know what I mean? They had this, and because we don't have that old tradition, we have this now trust and faith that the capitalists are going to provide the best products for us. Otherwise, it wouldn't be the best product. And I think that's what kind of happened with medicine and whatever else. And it became this thing of, as well, provable thing. Like you said, in medicine, I've given you a thing. So that thing did that to you. Hypnosis is, it's not that same causal, do you know what I mean? That same thing. There's too many variables within that, or things that become in their eyes pseudoscientific or unmeasurable, undeterminable under the current disciplines of science that have been broken down. And that's a whole other argument, you know, if science being broken down so it doesn't actually see what the left and the right hand are doing. And my other sort of point was street magicians, kind of your Derek Akoras and people like how Derek Akoras, he sort of like speaks to spirits and not him. Who am I thinking of? Darren Brown, people like that. Who was the guy with the eye? Shut himself in the box.
Oh,
David Blaine.
No, David.
No, David Blaine.
Okay.
Copperfield got rid of the Empire State Building on live TV, I think, if I remember but yeah, how kind of people like that do you think impacted the pursuit of it? Do people see it more as this like wrestling? Like, is it like they see it as a performative thing and it's a trick rather than there being an actual? I mean, people like Paul McKenna did good around his hypnosis for stopping smoking. I feel like that helped a bit more to people see measurable results and go, science is failing us. I've tried the Nicorette gum. I've tried all their products. I went and saw one of his bloody shows, got his book and his tape, and I'm done.
Yeah, he's very good. Paul Carr, How to Stop Smoking the Easy Way. Oh,
yeah.
I think those guys are amazing, actually. I've when I was in the early stage of my career as a hypnotist, I used to get together with this crew and we would go to Old Street and do street hypnosis and, you know, make people stuck to lampposts or forget the number 3 or think they were a Chinese comedian or, you know, all of that kind of stuff. And it's brilliant, you know. Yes, it becomes a spectacle. And the kind of stuff that I'm into now, I avoid doing that stuff. You know, I'll do it if someone buys me a drink and I'm pressed. When I do group hypnosis in particular, all the fireworks go off in the mind because the magic in there is fantastic. And if people are worried that they're going to be dancing around like a chicken or whatever it might be, then they don't relax. And a lot of the skill of a hypnotist is to make people feel comfortable and in control, because you are in control, right? Mm-hmm. What you said before about extending, I mean, I'm paraphrasing you, but hypnosis and other kind of mystical techniques extend the conscious mind into the unconscious. Yeah. I mean, we tend to think of hypnosis as giving up control of your conscious mind to someone else. It's totally the opposite, right? Like I can hypnotize. I had a needle phobic, for example, who whenever she saw a needle, she would puke and faint, that kind of stuff. And then she got diagnosed with diabetes and she was going to have to inject herself every day. She was about to move to next door to a friend's house so her friend could inject her, right? So we did 3 sessions with her. She didn't remember why it was to begin with. And even that's actually before the first session, I gave her a track to listen to. She listened to it 3 times. The 3rd time she remembered she'd been running around on a carpet when she was about 3 or 4, stood on a pin. Her mum freaked out. She got a cortisol spike, which is normally how simple phobias anyway, get transmitted. They're transmitted by a parent freaking out when they see a spider or something. And so she got a spike of cortisol she couldn't deal with. And ever since then, it's whenever she'd seen a needle, it re-traumatized her that way. That was very easy to solve, and it took couple of sessions literally. And one of the second time she came to see me, she got trapped in a lift on the way to mine, and she hadn't even told me, but she was also phobic of lifts, and that had also gone away, right? So these things are pretty easy to resolve, because you can take your conscious mind down into the unconscious. Same way you can make your mouth water, and you can basically start moving things around, moving things around in there. I think what's quite interesting when I started practicing, when we're talking about what was it, 12 years ago or something, I started practicing as a hypnotist. If you went on the NHS website, it said very simply, there is no evidence for hypnosis, which was bullshit, but that's what it said on the NHS website. You go there now, it's saying, well, it's been found to work for IBS, it's been found to work for, I think there's a couple other conditions, I forget exactly what they are. But that's changed, and you've also got other research coming out of the of other sciences. Like there's a really good study on how powerful pain medication is depending on whether it's red or blue, you know? And obviously red pain medication, actually I forget which one's better, but one of the two has more effect on pain. You can also, there's a really interesting study which has plotted the amount of money that a particular pain-killing medicine will spend on advertising and the amount of effect it will have on killing pain. You know, so we're starting to see, I think a lot of people are starting to see the holes in pharmaceuticals with the kind of the opiate crisis, with whatever the hell went on 2019, 2020 with that malarkey, you know. So all those kind of all those authority systems seem to be crumbling. Yeah. I used to joke that at least England still had a good post office, but we don't even have a good post office anymore. Like, my stuff doesn't even get delivered anymore. What have we got left in England? Like, not very much. We've got a good sense of humour. But in terms of like state support, nah, not a whole lot. It's a similar feel to what happens in the Reformation, right? After the Catholic Church loses its legitimacy in the 1500s, and you get the Lutherans and you get the Anabaptists, who they reject everything, including baptism and the Bible and the saints. They go on a kind of rioting spree across Europe. You get the Calvinists, you get the ranters and the diggers and the levelers. The ranters are meeting in pubs. The diggers and the levelers are doing their things with the commons. You get the Quakers. They're interesting because they're quaking. And they decide we're not going to say anything that's not true anymore. So they say less and less until they just say quiet, right? And the Quakers, they're amazing. They've been meeting, being quiet, and then rocking up a anti-war protests and getting arrested. These are the guys who did the first naked protest. I think in England, they were some of the first war tax resistors as well. You know, not very much doctrine, just, you know, we call each other friend rather than Mr. this and Lord that. And we greet each other by shaking hands rather than bowing. And we shut up for a while and see if the Holy Spirit moves us to talk. And usually it doesn't, so we just be quiet, you know. In this space where the authority figures are, you know, like what you said about the Emperor's New Clothes, you know, we're all pointing at these guys and we're going, oh, where did you take us during COVID? And what was your relationship to Mossad? And all bets are off. So part of what emerges out of that is loads of people believe all kinds of really crazy stuff. And you should, like, you know, when I fall to scrolling, my Instagram feed is, I'm embarrassed to say how wild the conspiracies get on there. But yeah, we're in a moment of incredible creativity in terms of our, what we are allowed to believe, what we can believe, and it's really dangerous. You know, you might believe that you're inside a computer game and nobody else exists. So that might be one way to spend your billions. You know.
Yeah, no, will be the right order. So last week's guest, I think it was last week's guest I was talking about this with. I was talking about Jurassic Park, and how when I was a kid, because we were talking about the shelf life of a fact, and basically I was saying, look, dinosaurs I know have feathers, but I believe, my faith is, and what I choose to believe in my secret heart, in my hidden heart, in the Japanese sort of tradition of it, is dinosaurs have scales, because I'm emotively connected to that. There's a nostalgia. But if you ask me, factually, I'm going to say that they have feathers, or at least we believe them to have feathers. Previously, we believed in da-da-da-da-da. Like, I'm going to provide all of the information because otherwise I feel it'd be a misrepresentation. And I think what's happening is that most people's reality and their faith have become the same thing. And through hyper-individualism, the adoption of Americana post-World War II, and the destruction of the state benefit apparatus, and I don't just mean in terms of the state giving money, the state's job being to make life better, not like disappearing and its job becoming to serve the functions of capital, have disconnected us. And I think the opioids one is a brilliant one, because if you really think about it, what is going on there is a pain. Forget where the pain comes from. There's a pain that arises in the populace. The system goes, we can manufacture a very specific drug that'll take away that pain. However, your pain receptors will then become increased. So you'll need more of that drug. But don't worry, your tolerance will go up. So you have to give us more of money. So then you give you more of that. But your tolerance goes okay. So we give you more, and then we invent another one. And they go up this scale when actually that guy's back pain probably could have been because at the time he had a job where he bent down too much. But he's 40 years into an opioid problem. His liver's shot, his heart's gone, and he's going to die. Like, that's emblematic of I see everything wrong with the system, and it's the evidence, like you say. But now the medical bodies are going, shit, get away from opioids. We need to do everything that we can to get the hell away from them, change all sorts of protocols. But this is where they're struggling. They're bringing in cannabinoids as a way to deal with it. And cannabinoids are a far better way of dealing with pain because they don't turn off a system or your perception of a system, which is where I think hypnosis comes in wonderfully for pain, as we were talking about before in amputation, etc. Is it's doing the same thing the opioid is doing, but it's not having the peripheral effects. Consciousness is driving the numbing. Cannabinoids, however, modulate consciousness so you can be aware of the pain, but it's not pain, it's not unbearable. It's an awareness to it. And so I always use the analogy of, say, you broke your ankle. You can go get a load of opioids and go second day, oh, my ankle's fine, and walk on it. Like, I've got the worst clavicle, or you kind of see, because I've got a 2-inch clavicle drop on my right arm. It's an inch longer now because after I broke my clavicle in a car accident, I went to Leeds Fest and proceeded to use MDMA as a painkiller. And the reset of my body is, and I'm suffering. You see me, it's still in this. Like, I've got a constant problem in all of the alignment of my back because my body's grown into itself. Do you know what I mean? And so it's the perception and the management of the thing is basically where we're at. And I think that we can't have that conversation. There isn't now a pharmaceutical solution to this that doesn't involve what they have now termed the occult. Like you were talking about, like, cannabis is a big one, a big problem for them. They're prescribing it in the UK. Cannabis is a cannabinoid delivery system for the specific prescribing of a ratio of 2 cannabinoids, CBD to THC. Everything else is a contaminant. But people that know you smoke 2 different types of cannabis, the smell, the flavor, that is indicative of completely different experiences. How can that be described if not as herbalism, if not as like botanicals, as not as I've lost the other word.
Yeah, I mean, well, I know where you're going with it. Like, so you're extracting so-called active components from an entourage, and you're extracting the plant from its culture. So, for example, back to the opiates. The Hmong people are the masters of this. They grew it in Cambodia. And in their culture, opium is used to ease the pain of old age. And if you're a young person and you're using opium, what the hell is wrong with you? You know, sort yourself out. Even they have a shamanic tradition there. They don't use opium in their shamanic tradition. Right? They've got access to it. They grow it. But you know, we said, that looks good, and it's wrapped up with the British East India Company and all of that kind of history, which maybe we'll get to on another podcast.
Do a specific podcast for that, because there's so much that I do want to unpack, and I'm just mindful of time.
Yeah, so. And I guess we'll kind of rounding off here, but it's a very similar thing that's happening with the cannabinoids as well. And guess who's patenting it? Beckley, you know, English aristocrats, American industrialists, military interests with maps, for example, sponsored by the Mercers, sponsored by the Koch brothers, speaking at conferences tracks sponsored by the military and weapons contractors. These guys will take control of everything. I have a hope that the underground maintains its own ethics on psychedelics, actual psychedelics, and I'm including acid in there as well. Although DARPA just got 27, well, they've had their $27 million grant to make less psychoactive LSD as well, But I like to hope that the psychedelics are intrinsically disruptive, and I'm sure that trance is intrinsically disruptive because historically it has been. We have used the techniques of hypnosis are also the techniques of marketing. It's embedded command. Would you like to? If you buy this printer now, then you get a 20% off. That's an embedded command, right? Do you have does your printer get jammed? Yes. Would you like a printer that doesn't get jammed? Yes. So now you're in a yes set, right? We use that in hypnosis all the time. Hypnosis and marketing is very similar techniques, but the heart that is behind it is what makes a lasting effect, because you might buy a printer and then a year later it's like, man, that printer's still jamming, But if you have a proper intervention, and it's not just about hypnosis, hypnosis is just a form of communication. So you get this with any kind of, proper meeting of souls, of hearts. They can be curative. Like hypnosis just adds some linguistic techniques to it and some kind of skill in metaphor. I hope and I think that words are too powerful to be fully co-opted by the state, and I think that there's something behind the words. I think that there's some innate intelligence which is just squirms against manacles. And it dissolves them somehow, whether that's with psychedelics, whether that's with love, whether that's with something else.
Just even in the linguistics of it, like the state tries to pin down, take a photo of a video, and it doesn't work. They try to go, okay, with the law, the language, we lock it in. They use their legalese bollocks, which in and of itself is a fucking form of incantation against the masses. But they're trying to lock it down, and then culture rebels against it. And then literally I have this rant all the time of like, words are not words. It's the thing behind the words. Like, this is a pen, because at some point we all agreed it's a pen. But I could also say, I could be descriptive of it, like you said about the sand and the pile. Like, that mechanism is in defiance of state order, because state order can only be good for a snapshot. We can rise and have a government like post-World War, and we had Bevan and all that lot, and we built the system, but then other forces come in, and it's like this yin and yang of reality, like I said at the start earlier, of like the greed of men. But I think the greed of men comes from a warped mechanism in the brain of security. Money equals stuff. If I've got stuff, I don't have to worry. But then that's the prioritization. The same as people with hypersexualization or other things. There's just something, the bars, like when you're designing a PlayStation 1 or 2 character and you've got the bars to make your character, some bars have just got turned up to 11. And I think like hypnosis, psychotherapy, especially entheogenic drugs that can help rewire you in that way, cultural interactions, third spaces, hobbies, practices like chanting, singing, being part of music, creating, even individually practices like yoga, meditation. These things sort of dissolve the matrix. I mean, it's such a corrupted kind of concept, but the layer that's put on by capital, the allowances by which you're allowed to move through the world, and then you start to push against it. And when enough people push against it, the facade falls apart. And I think that's what we're seeing, is the harder they push to control us through the surveillance state, through censorship, through AI domination, through blockchain or whatever other crap, like, we're rebelling in all sides. We are the slime mold. The slime mold to round all this in a nice little package of our consciousness will always find a way around their thought of the walls of Jericho, to use an analogy you spoke of earlier. Like, that's intrinsic to us. That's my hope, that I can have as dark of a vision for the future as I do, but have such a passion and a willingness to give my life to a better future, because I truly believe it will happen. or if it doesn't happen for us, maybe in the multiverse that we're connected to or whatever. There's value and meaning to doing and pursuing the life in the way that I am. And I think anybody that is creative in any which way, that pursues anything as an individualistic practice or as a form of mastery, you are providing value to the chain of human beings, infinitum.
Well, most certainly. I think we're on the way to something. Let's put it that way. One of the things that got me really interested, and I think we should probably finish with this. One of the things that got me really interested in the apocalypse was those Jehovah's Witnesses that I mentioned, and they so they've had 6 now predictions of the end of the world, and farmers have not bothered planting their fields, and people have put off life-saving operations and all of that kind of stuff. And I started looking into the theology of it. And you have this line from Matthew, it's Matthew 13:49, and in English it goes like this: "So shall it be at the end of the world, the angels shall come forth and sever the wicked from among the just." And if you look quite closely at that line, the word world is aeon, and aeon doesn't mean world, it means aeon. It means an epoch, At the end of the epoch, and even those words, the wicked shall be cut off from amongst the just, it's not necessarily talking about people. It could be talking about kind of alchemical wickedness separates out from justness, right? So we're not necessarily talking about particular people getting cast into the flame. We were talking about potentially particular drives, or whatever it might be. It's not specified what it is. I guess my fear is how much pain and destruction it takes to get from here to there. But I think in the meantime we focus on what makes us happy. What we can. One of my mentors, let's say, or leaders in the Santa Daime community that I was involved with for a very long time, he described what the business to be doing at the moment was to be holding onto a seed, like making a seed. So after this storm has passed, we can plant it and grow a tree that travelers can find rest underneath. And I think it's that moment, and if you look at a lot of plants, when they come to the end of their lives, you see this with annual plants, for example, there's this explosion of colour and scent, and then all of the energy goes into the seed, and all the flowers die, and everything else dies, and you just get left with this information encased in a shell, and the Bible would be an example of that, as the community in Judea was collapsing under the weight of empire. It produced this kind of text. And there's more and more history of that. And now that text has done all kinds of terrible things as well as good. But it was a piece of information which has managed to survive 2,000 years and direct a whole lot of stuff, And I think what we're seeing at the moment in culture is a lot of creativity, and a lot of kind of production of information. And I'm... another example would be seed banks. Another example would be archives of kind of footage of animals that are becoming extinct. All that kind of stuff is being encased and collected somewhere. So I think at this particular moment in history, it's about preparing ourselves for a storm, encasing what we've got in viable forms that can regrow and take over. I imagine the future is sometimes I think of graffiti and vines climbing up all of the shells of buildings, the cracks in the pavement with all the flowers coming out of them. And that's beyond something that I don't want to think too hard about because I'm in a good mood.
No, yeah, it's interesting that I think the line that's going to resonate most for me from this conversation is that the apocalypse is not going to save you. I think there's a lot to it. The way you were saying before about sort of the end of an epoch, the end of an era. I think you can see it. So what does it say? The arc of history is long and bends towards justice. And I think that it's what you were describing before of the usage and the drop of drugs of things through dilution. The same thing is kind of happening with us. So something terrible happens, and then there is a wave and a time, and we come to either accept or understand it or overcome it. So in my own lifetime, the way in which people deal with each other in this country has changed fundamentally. Granted, it feels like we're now coming over the other side of the wave and going, we have to accept that. The radical acceptance of what is, while then still pushing kind of the ideals of what we kind of hope and want to be. And it's that beautiful dance between it all. And I think so much of that it isn't spoke of. It isn't on your phone. It isn't going to be shown on TV. You know, that line of the revolution will not be televised. It starts within. And yeah, I just hope people have found something of use to this. I know it might be a bit of an esoteric conversation to some people. But yeah, where can then people that are interested keep up with you? You mentioned Substack, etc. So what do you want to plug? Where can people find you?
Okay, thank you. I will plug this, Apocalypse. This book's great. This one, Science Revealed. This one is, I'm not going to tell you what they're about. We've talked enough. They are on dannynemu.com, DANNYNEMU.com. And from there, you can find my Substack. You can find my hypnosis work, which is trance with a C, transformhypno.com. There's some free downloads there. So if you want a taste of hypnosis, which involves sitting in your own house and just listening to me speaking slowly and sharing a poem and seeing what happens to your head, then you can go and check it out there. It's available. There's a free one there. There's also other ones which are not free. There's between.com, which I'm really excited about. So that's art, A-R-T. So check that out. That's the art and hypnosis and poetry collaboration. The Substack is called The Book of Nemu. And on Instagram, I am at Danny Nemu.
Great. I will include all the links below. Excellent. Yeah, let's wrap up here, and I'll come back and do some housekeeping in a second. So yeah, it's been a pleasure, Danny. Thank you for taking the time. Definitely going to get you back to do purely just drugs and war. And like I said, I think as we were talking about before we kind of started recording, we complement each other's knowledge base quite well. And I think there's a good chronology and conversation of that we can derive from that.
Yeah, something we actually forgot to plug is the fact that I met Simpa up in Glasgow at the Psychedelics Week there, and we did a long conversation about war and drugs, which you can also find on my Substack. So
Nice.
Thank you for that. Thank you for this. I think the revolution might be broadcast by podcast, even if it's not televised.
Ooh, I like that. The revolution will be podcasted. Sweet. We'll finish with that. Been a pleasure, Danny. Thank you. All right, peace and love.
Bye.
Well, there you go, folks. That was Danny Nemu. Hope you enjoyed that. I didn't go through half of the questions. I've got so many notes in terms of things I wanted to talk to him about. So as we mentioned there, we'll definitely get him back on. In the meantime, there's a conversation between me and him about war and drugs that is available on his Substack. I'll try and get a direct link and put that in the links in the bio below. I enjoyed that conversation. It was really, really good to get into sort of the nitty gritty of consciousness and its kind of relations to medicine and like altered states. I thought the stuff around the apocalypse was really quite interesting and fascinating as well. Definitely going to grab a couple of copies of his books or a copy of each of his books because I am now fascinated by it, frankly. So if you would like to do the same, do check him out via his website, which again is in the links below. Housekeeping this ends, not really much to announce on Albert Green at the minute, unfortunately. We have now escalated our complaints around freedom of information regulation and environmental information regulations to the ICO. I think 4 complaints have now gone in. We're working through the process at the minute. However, the council are in violation of their own statutory deadlines, so I'm not really sure where we're kind of going with that at the minute. I don't know whether I can kind of announce this. I'll probably go on. I'll announce this. I've recently been given the support of a international law firm from London with a few of their specialists in various areas of law that are going to advise me and help me build my case for civil litigation against the council. So we still have, quite a lot of fight left in us, as it were. I'm still asking people to sign the petition as well for the pausing of the Elvet Waterside, which is the building on site, which is now being sold off to private developers. We believe unlawfully, because there was a failure to adhere to their responsibility as local authority under the Localism Act and under the 1972, is it Local Governments Act? Too much legislation is bouncing around in my brain. But yeah, so that's some pretty damn good news that I'm excited about. So yeah, if you wouldn't mind, I'll include the link below. Sign the petition to help prevent the destruction of Elbert Green by them selling off basically half the park to be redeveloped. Yeah, like I said at the start, hope you're keeping well. Hope you're enjoying the better weather and the brighter days. I'm not going to keep you any longer. This has been slightly longer than I wanted to. I did say I was going to try and keep it to 2 hours, but I was just too enthralled with the conversation there with Danny. Anyway, if you've enjoyed this as much as I did, please give us a like, a share, a thumbs up, a heart, whatever it is you do on your platform to show your appreciation. I appreciate it. Appreciate you. Please do check out simpalife.com for a whole back catalogue of articles and exclusive blogs, etc. Check us out on patreon.com/simplife, where for less than a cup of coffee a week, you can help me keep the lights on this little project of mine. And yeah, we're at Simpa Life or at Simpa Life Podcast on Facebook and Instagram as well. All right, I'll be back next week with, I don't know, somebody. You'll love it. I'll love it. It'll be great. All right, peace and love, folks. See you later. Um, well, oh my God, I've just noticed you staring at me. Is it dinner time? It's not even dinner time. Yeah. Sorry, my cat's giving me evils from the hallway.